Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We are really excited to have you all here. I'm going to give a couple of minutes of a quick introduction of who we are and some housekeeping duties before we kick off. So we are, our group is the Appalachian Science Communicators, and we are a regional science communicators group that was formed a little over a year ago. And we are pretty eclectic group of people that come from all professional backgrounds, from journalists to writers, freelancers, university communications experts, and so on and so forth. And we, when the pandemic hit, we started this virtual series of called AppSciComm Conversations, and we've had several great guests, and it's really been a wonderful series that we're excited. Today, our guests are Denise, Cetta, and Katie Brennan. And before that, I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Arvind Suresh. I'm one of the co-founders of the group, along with several other members here who've really helped move this forward. Before I turn it over to our moderator today, I just want to go over a few housekeeping things. And of course, having Zoom issues. I hope everybody is able to see my screen. Of course. Okay, here we go. So as I mentioned, as you probably heard, this Q&A is being recorded and will be posted on our website for those who are not able to attend. There was a lot of interest for people who couldn't make it today but wanted to hear from Denise and Katie, so we'll be posting it. If you have a question, you can either post it in the chat and we'll address it after during the open Q&A session, or if you want to ask it live, you can raise your hand and one of us will call upon you to ask your question. Until then, please stay muted so we can hear our speakers and our moderator. Couple of other things. What's next for AppSciComm? We're looking for other events to do. So if you are a member or would like to become a member and want to host or have an interesting guest idea in mind, please let us know. One of the things that we're debating over just today was hosting a science trivia night, and we're looking into options. So if you're excited about that, let us know. And we'll keep you posted on that for those of us who have signed up for our emails. And if you want to help, if you want to join us, we're always looking for volunteers to help. So that's my portion of the housekeeping duties. And now I'm going to turn it over to AppSciComm member Anna Gorlova to take it away. Anna.
Thank you, Arvind, and thanks again, everyone, for coming. And I would like to welcome our guest today, who is Denise Cetta and Katie Brennan, the two CBS 60 Minutes producers who came to Pittsburgh in late February, maybe early March, to record an episode on the coronavirus variant. So that's how I met them. So a little bit of an introduction for both of them. Denise is a veteran producer and a writer for 60 Minutes at CBS News, who has reported on the biggest news events in the last 25 years, including several groundbreaking segments on the coronavirus pandemic. Denise is known for her medical and science reporting, but her desire to highlight the stories of those who often lack a voice has led to award-winning reports on racial justice and child welfare. And Katie is an award-winning producer and a reporter for 60 Minutes, who has covered stories on a variety of subjects, including coronavirus pandemic. And prior to joining 60 Minutes, she was a producer on the legacy franchise On the Road when she crisscrossed the country, finding compelling human interest stories to share on CBS Evening News and CBS Sunday Morning. So thank you, Denise and Katie, and I look forward to our conversation today. So I would like to kick it off and ask one of you a question, and either of you can answer. Tell us a little bit about your path to journalism and TV journalism in particular. Maybe we can start with Denise now, and then Katie can chime in.
Well, thanks for having us. And my interest in broadcast journalism goes back to when I was a teenager watching 60 Minutes with my family. My generation did a lot of that on Sunday nights over dinner time. And so I became really interested in telling stories that had, factual writing, but also visual components. And so it goes way back, but I did not go to journalism school. I just got a history degree and then did internships. And the advice back then was just learn a lot of history and political science and learn how to write and get your experience on the side. I think that's changed. Katie has a different entree into the business, but one thing led to another. I started in documentaries and then eventually did a documentary on Walter Cronkite's life and career, and met Morley Safer through that documentary series. And of course, he was one of the main correspondents at 60 Minutes. So I started working for him 24 years ago and worked for him for several years.
What about you, Katie?
Yeah, so I started, I was actually kind of more interested in film, started taking a lot of journalism classes at my university, and got really interested in documentary. Took kind of the first job I could get out of college at CBS radio news, where I was working on the 24/7 news desk, doing, freelance overnight shifts, and sort of worked my way up at CBS until I was at 60 Minutes. And then I took a couple years off to go work on this on the road series that is small kind of human interest stories. It was started by Charles Corral, now the correspondent, and a man named Steve Hartman. But I was his producer, and every week I would look for interesting human interest stories for us to cover across the country. And we traveled every single week shooting those, and they would air on the evening news and Sunday morning. So very different from what I'm doing now, but then came back to 60 Minutes because I was, wanting to get back more into reporting on, more of a range of subjects and sort of harder news, and also long form journalism, which is honestly so rare in broadcast news, and really I feel very lucky to be able to do long form.
And so I wanted to follow up on this idea of, covering very wide range of stories on many subjects that are oftentimes very complicated and are evolving. So how do you decide what stories do you want to cover? Scientific stories and, general interest stories as well. And how do you get your story ideas for the show? And maybe let's start with you, Katie.
Oh, sure. So we have a system at 60 Minutes. So the structure of 60 Minutes is we're on teams of a producer and associate producer. So Denise is the producer, I'm the associate producer, and we work for a couple correspondents. We're kind of mainly with Anderson Cooper, but sometimes we've done done stories with other correspondents. Just kind of depends on the story. But Denise and I are constantly going back and forth, sending each other articles, sending each other ideas, researching, talking to people, trying to find the nice part about 60 Minutes. It's like, one of the best parts about it is if we find something interesting and our managers agree, we can generally do it. So we don't necessarily have beats, though. Denise has spent, her career mainly doing a lot of medical and health stories, and so I've worked on those with her. But anyway, so basically, it's really just us trying to figure out what our audience would like, and what Denise and I would like to, spend our time on as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add to that, Denise?
Probably just that sometimes the best way to find stories is one story might lead to another. So once you're in a subject and you're learning, we learn so much and talk to so many people, and then we have to boil it down to 12 minutes. And so lots of times that learning that you're doing initially on the story might lead to something else. And I echo what Katie says, that one of the best things is that we can literally find a story anywhere. I always tell people the story of, I always wanted to do a story on how intelligent animals are. And it was always in the back of my mind, and thought about, there was this parrot who, could say all these things and do all these things. And I started researching the subject matter. And then I have these 2 dogs that work under my desk all the time. And one day I was thinking, well, wait a second, maybe we should do a story about dogs. And so the research got more focused in on dogs, and we ended up doing a story. I did a story with Anderson Cooper about 6 years ago on the bond between human and dog. So sometimes things just come out of the blue, but it's so rewarding when you can kind of take that journey and find this, especially I love the science and the medicine because there's such a component of learning in that. A lot of stories, I hate to disrespect like political reporting, but sometimes it just feels like the same thing over and over again. Whereas whenever you delve into a science or medical story, it's going to take you places intellectually and also usually emotionally as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just was gonna say, like growing up, science was always my, least favorite class in school because it just, it felt boring to me. So I would never have imagined that I'd find, reporting on these stories so interesting now, but it is, I think, because every story is so different. It's constantly learning about science and treatments and everything. And then also just the human component is so compelling and interesting.
Mm-hmm. And to again follow up on that, so you said that science topics are usually so complex. So how do you go about sort of distilling it in the way that people understand it, also in such a short time frame? You only have 15 minutes, give or take, for an episode. So how do you go about distilling something so complex as the coronavirus pandemic, or even, dog cognition? Like, I'm sure there's a lot of research that goes into that stuff. So how do you decide what to cover, what not to cover? And just, kind of a fact from a shoot that we did with Katie and Denise, I'm pretty sure they have about 10 to 8 hours of footage from the university. And we have, I think there's maybe a minute or a minute and a half that made it into the segment. So that kind of shows you how much work and prep goes into the episode, but how compact it has to be at the end. So can you talk about sort of those decisions of what to leave, what to focus on, with science specific topics?
I would imagine it's similar to the process that science writers go through, but for us, we throw a wide net. We depend on a lot of people's time and patience with us to learn as much as we can, but to pay keen attention to that moment where something clicks and you understand it, and remembering that that's what you want the viewers and to have that experience as well. And then, we really rely on people like Paul Dupre can attest to the fact that he spent a lot of time with us, starting with, a big picture and then cutting it down, simplifying it, making sure, doubling back, making sure it's accurate, but simple enough. And I always, because the way that I watch TV a lot is folding laundry or doing dishes or taking a walk. And so I feel like we're always trying to make it even more simple than you think you need to make it. I do believe that the variance story that we did with you all probably tested our viewers, because there was so much science in it, but we felt because of the pandemic and because people seem to have a higher degree of literacy with the terms in the pandemic and the virus and everything, that was okay. But I do think it was a challenging piece to just watch one time through and understand everything.
So it makes me feel a little better that even seasoned TV producers still watch TV while folding laundry. So I feel validated. So can you take us back, Katie, kind of behind the scenes of the episode? So with all the prep that you did, and it takes, I don't know how much work it took from you to get from a general idea to deciding where to go and where to film, and what to do, and those decisions that you made with making graphics, and again, what to cut in post-production. So tell us a little bit about that sort of behind the scenes kitchen of a production.
Sure. So I would say typically with science stories, Denise and I will take many, many months, or even like we've spent years covering science stories, following clinical trials. But now obviously with a pandemic, a breaking news story, you don't have the luxury of that. And so, going into the variant story, we knew, our team had been covering a lot of the pandemic throughout the 60 Minutes season. And we knew, this is what scientists were talking about as sort of like the next hurdle to cross during the pandemic, were these concerns about variants and will the vaccines still be effective with these variants. One thing that surprised us, I think, while covering it, was just how much the scientists were so surprised at how quickly the virus had evolved, and not just because it had the ability to replicate in so many people. But I guess, so, Denise and I were actually working on another story that had nothing to do with the coronavirus when we started reporting the story. It was a story on climate change. So we kind of had to, quickly shift gears and kind of figure out, what is this variant story? So talking to as many people as we possibly could, we thought we would focus really on more genetic sequencing, because that was, genetic sequencing was underfunded, and the US just wasn't doing a lot of genetic sequencing of the virus. And of course, that's how, how the virus is evolving. So we thought we'd really focus our story on that. But then once we started talking to people, sequencing is just not that visually interesting. It's a white, tiny machine. And, we tried to make it as visual as possible in our piece by using NextStrain, which is a data visualization website that scientists use to kind of track the variants, because we thought, viewers could kind of comprehend it that way. But anyway, it quickly evolved from a story about genetic sequencing to something more that was like, what are these variants? How did they actually evolve in the body? And that's when, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center really came into play for us. Is, I think Denise sent an article about how scientists were starting to sort of, realize at the time that a lot of that in immunocompromised patients, the virus was mutating in ways that were creating a lot of the mutations. Correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but as some of the variants. And so we kind of thought, wow, that's a really interesting sort of like easy way for viewers to understand how variants could evolve in the human body. And so we kind of shifted gears and wanted to tell that element and kind of use that as a way to show how variants evolved from the original strain to now the B117 and South African potentially. I don't know if that answered the question, but Denise, do you have more to add to that?
No, I think, part of the challenge, knowing the format that you have to fit into, which is 12 and a half minutes and a certain engagement with a variety of characters. So we're always trying to find that balance of elements, something that maybe isn't very visual, but then finding something that is. So when we had the conversation with you all late that one night, and Paul Dupre came on the screen and started with his amazing way of explaining some of the science, it was like, bingo, okay, that's going to be part he's going to do a beautiful job for that sector of the storytelling that we need. And then you're kind of, you know, trying to find those elements and fit them into a structure and not duplicate too much. So I always think of it as a puzzle. Like the first part of the puzzle is when you're researching and meeting everybody before you go out and shoot, like what are the puzzle pieces. And then once you shoot everything and you watch everything, then the puzzle pieces are really small and you're putting together that really intricate puzzle, which is the script. And so that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You build a frame first and then you just fill in the inside. Yeah, that's very interesting. And so for both of you, neither of you have a science background, but you have been covering very complex topics. So for each of you, what was maybe the biggest challenge in this whole endeavor, or something that was most, so on one hand challenging, but on the other hand, most rewarding or exciting?
I would say the two challenging things are gaining the trust of patients and researchers, and coming into the reporting and the storytelling, you know, with good intentions and building those human bonds, which you do in television or print reporting, whatever, and making sure that your goal is aligned with their goal and what's reasonable to ask of people, because we've certainly asked people to bare their souls on television and to, you know, let people see them going through medical treatments and a lot of scary things for families and so forth. So that's a challenge, but, you know, a really heartfelt, you know, wonderful challenge. The second area that I think is sometimes challenging is convincing the scientists that it's worth their time to work with us. And I think not having a science background can be challenging at first, but ends up being a benefit if you can find researchers that are willing to put the time, you know, spend the time with you, because then, sort of as I alluded to before, you know, you can channel what's going to work for the viewers at home. So sort of your ignorance ends up being a benefit in the end if you if you can find people who are patient with you.
And how about you, Katie?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with everything Denise said. It's really, I guess we also are having constant conversations with scientists of science, and I think this is a benefit of not having a science background, though there are a lot of issues to that, as Denise alluded to. We really need patient researchers to answer our very low level science questions. Mine more so than Denise's, because she's spent a long time covering science stories. But I was just going to say, we have so many conversations with scientists, especially during the script writing process. And Paul was really, really exceptional at this. But a lot of them aren't, of, this of kind of simplifying things. There's certain words we can't put on television. It will just go over people's heads. We only have 12 minutes to explain already, like, a very complicated subject. And so if you're throwing in, scientific terms, we don't have the time to explain that. So it's, working with scientists to kind of create sort of interesting, some metaphors, or just really kind of being concise and just as simple as possible, which I would say sometimes, scientists, obviously, like, there's a lot of words they would want to add to our script to make it 110% accurate, but we always try to remind them, this is for a general American audience, and we just are really looking to keep their attention. And so, and for them to understand, it as simply as possible. So it's always sort of a dance, I would say, that Denise and I are kind of doing with scientists to kind of make sure that it's accurate, but is simple.
And would you say it's sort of one of the biggest mistakes that people make or scientists make when talking to you, or in general for being interviewed for TV, is speaking with a lot of jargon? We have a question in the chat asking what are the biggest mistakes that scientists, engineers, and health professionals make when talking to reporters. So would that be one of them?
Denise, what do you think about that question?
I would say yes, yeah. Making it too complicated. And also, regardless of the subject matter, I think that stories and interviews are always best when, and I know this is hard to ask of people, especially some people hear 60 Minutes and think, oh, you're digging for dirt, or you're going to try to expose something. But really, more openness and more trust, I think, always ends up with a better story for everybody. So, if there's a defensive posture, I feel like that always hurts a program or an interview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so right now I realized that I completely forgot to even play the episode that Denise and Katie produced that the University of Pittsburgh was participating in. So I just wanted to ask Arvind if you could play the segment, and then we'll take a break with questions. And then in the meantime, we are looking at the chat, so please feel free to add your questions in, and I'll make sure to ask it.
Yeah, absolutely. I can play the clip. I should let everybody know that for copyright reasons, we're going to pause the recording right now, and then we'll pick it back up when the clip is completed playing. If you have any questions or can't get for some reason, let me know.
Thanks, Arvind.
Millions and millions of people.
These samples were from the patient's lung. Right?
An early clue about.
Perfect. that was very smooth with recording stopping and starting. Yeah, so you've packed so much information into the episode. So I'm just again curious. As a science writer, I know that sometimes I get so familiar with the topic that I cover that I just kind of can't see how it can get complicated for some people. So do you have this, internal check system of how to make sure that, your stories are understandable for people? Do you go to your friends and family, or how do you approach that part? And again, to either of you.
First of all, I wanted to mention that Dr. John LaPook's he's on the webinar right now too. And so
Hi, John.
It's amazing to work with him because he has such a high level of understanding and also compassion and interest and enthusiasm. So when we're working with him, it makes our jobs easier because he knows so much and is so invested. And in terms of finding that right balance, in terms of the how complicated we can make an idea, I think there are kind of checks and balances all along the way. Like I was going to mention that we have a graphic artist that we work with, and he actually built that animation. And then we went back and forth with Paul to say, does this work? And we tweaked it a little bit. And so he's not a scientist, he's a graphic artist. So if we present him with something and say, this is, sometimes send him a little sketch of what we think it should look like. If he says, oh, this is too complicated, people are never going to understand. And then we go through the screening process with our executive producer. There are lots of steps along the way where we can make sure it's not too complicated. And sometimes we go too far out and then we have to cut an element because it is too complicated. I can't remember off the top of my head whether we did that on this story. Actually, we did. On this story, we went into the antibody, like challenging the antibodies with the different variants. And we just decided for a number of reasons, like that's a bridge too far. People people aren't going to be able to take in that subject matter on addition to everything else.
So you kind of, it varies from story to story, and there is no, I guess, recipe for deciding what to cut and what to keep. We have a question in the chat that sort of asks this.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a very collaborative process for us, which is nice. Well, for this story in particular, hi, Dr. Ilfuk, who's on, but he has been covering the pandemic. He's a doctor first and foremost, but he's also been covering the pandemic every single day for CBS News. He's the chief medical correspondent for CBS News. So he knew so much. And then, Denise and I kind of came in because, again, we were working on this other story, and we kind of took his information and synthesized it down. And so there was that layer of like what we thought was interesting and easy, digestible for people to understand, and the most important elements at the time we were reporting them. And then we have a really great process at 60 Minutes. Well, we have an editor who's actually physically cutting the story, and he's not involved in any of the reporting or the research process. So he's another sort of set of fresh eyes of, if he doesn't understand something, or he doesn't, something's not working for him, that's kind of another layer of honing it down. And then we have our final step once we've gotten the piece to something we would want to present to our managers. We have a screening process where there's 5 people at 60 Minutes who their whole jobs are just watching stories, and they don't watch a frame of the story until they get pitched the idea, they approve, they say yes or no to the idea, and then they really know nothing about it until we come back and present them with what we think is close to final. And then that goes through a series of screenings and edits of, I don't understand this. So it's another set of 5 fresh eyes. So I would say it's just a very nice, lucky process at 60 Minutes of all these kind of different layers of fresh eyes that also that kind of, can find what they find most interesting, and can also stop us if we're going down a rabbit hole that people won't understand. Yeah,
that sounds like a amazing resource to have so many, not necessarily checks and balances, but just sort of gut check points where you can make sure that, if those folks don't understand it, that there's no way if I play it on TV, then those people, who are sitting in their living rooms would get it. So it just sounds like an amazing process, an amazing tool for you guys. So another question that just came in is about how can you prepare scientists, engineers, and health professionals for visits from national level journalists? So should science communicators or people who work at universities or medical centers, should they kind of brief them and come up with possible questions, or again, brief them and make sure they understand of this process of translating complicated concepts in developing analogies. So let's just start with that one first.
I'll let Denise take this, but I wanted to add just one more thought to our sort of checks and balances system for people that don't have the 5 layers that we have. Denise and I do this all the time, I know, because we talk about it, is we will say something to our family and friends and be like, is that interesting? Do you want to learn more about this? Do you understand this? Like, we'll show them something. And, they all come from a diverse set of backgrounds. And if it's interesting, or they don't understand it, or, they don't think it's interesting, it's valuable information for us to have, because they are the general population that we're trying to show our stories to. So it's a nice, we do that frequently. I know a lot about what Denise's husband thinks.
Yeah, I figured that you guys must have, a group of friends or whoever that you just go to. So I was like, do they have to sign an NDA before you show them something?
It's a small group of people, but yes, trusted.
It's also, I'm sure it's the same for all of you. If you if you find a story and you're researching it and you want to learn as much as you can, as quickly as you can, and talk to more people, like just your sheer interest and motivation in telling the story, you know, answers the question, is this a story worth telling? So that's always the most important gut check in terms of whether it's a story worth telling. And then in terms of preparing scientists and researchers, I mean, I would say, you know, first is investing the time, you know, to be with a reporter or a filmmaker or whatever. And then also being aware of what the outlet is. So if you know you're meeting with a 60 Minutes reporter, like refresh yourself on what 60 Minutes is, because lots of times I think we waste time and the people we're meeting with waste time if there's not an awareness of what the actual end product is, because it can be so different. You know, whether it's an article that's highly scientific or an evening news piece that's 90 seconds long versus a 60 Minutes piece. So I think that's really valuable time spent before meetings. And also, I know this is hard, but sometimes it's looking internally at the lab or the research group and really being honest about who's going to be the best spokesperson, because unfortunately the senior person is not always the best communicator. And so it's, you know, I always feel like it's most important for the university or the lab or the company to get their story out and get their research out. And it doesn't really matter who tells the story or does the interview. And I know that's harder with internal politics, but I think it's an important thing to always help people understand is, listen, we got to get our research out there, and whoever the journalists think can tell that story best, we should probably trust them because that's what they do for a living.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of conversations with institutions on, you know, thank you so much for allowing us to cover this story and giving us access. But, you know, can we talk to the researcher that's actually in the lab who, you know, is a great communicator and is just effusive about their work and, you know, is there every single day versus sort of the head of the lab, just because it just makes, as Denise is saying, a more compelling story. And, you know, that's sort of, I think, what both parties want at the end of the day is people to want to watch the story and find it interesting. And
we had a follow-up question from I think it's Joseph is he must be a PIO at the University of William and Mary, who is asking if 60 Minutes were to come to my university, how much time should I tell researchers and scientists to set aside? And he says he promises that he has a good story.
Oh, well, I would say email me after this meeting and I will drive down and spend 2 to 3 hours with you and meet a few people and you can show me around. And then usually what our process is we have phone conversations now, you know, Zooms or phone conversations. And then if we have usually an approved story already, but sometimes we'll even do a scouting trip prior to that. And then we will come and take a visit and meet in person and kind of troubleshoot, okay, what would the timing be? What would the visual elements be? And then we would come back with the crew and the correspondent to actually do the shooting. So we're
in touch a lot to make sure what we're saying is accurate and we're characterizing things accurately. So as UPMC can attest, we are we require a lot of time.
There has been many meetings, that is true.
Yes.
So we have one hand raised from Danny Cooper. Danny, why don't you unmute yourself and ask a question?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I was wondering, as somebody working kind of more on the PR side with corporations, like what are the kind of different areas that you think academia is like best to speak to versus a company, and kind of how can the industry like be a partner to you guys in a story best?
I'm trying to think how to answer that.
mean, I would just answer what's, you know, meaning like if like research institutions versus private companies are doing similar research, which.
Yeah, like is there just kind of a preference to go with academia like innately, or is there, an area where?
I wouldn't say so. I would say we usually look for, what's doing the most interesting research, and also just what's willing to give us the time and access that will give us, allow us to tell, the best story. I mean, I think UPMC, we had talked to some other researchers about how to visualize the variants, and also some other researchers that had studied, in immunocompromised patients. And just the fact that UPMCA, Paul Dupre was an incredible communicator, so was Gotti. And they were willing to give us sort of the time and access and work with us, and felt excited about us being there. Was really, and they were doing the research that we wanted to showcase. It just, everything sort of aligned. So I don't think we're ever really looking for, company versus research institution necessarily. Denise, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think, there isn't really a preference one way or the other. It's just making sure that the sort of the same rules apply. Like we just did this story about climate change and Bill Gates' book. And so there were a lot of startup companies that he features in his book. And of course, working with them, it's the same ideas. Are they willing, was the CEO willing to get on the phone with us, explain the science behind what they're doing? Make sure that the way we're featuring the product or the technology isn't like a commercial for the corporation, even though they clearly had a vested interest in getting on 60 Minutes. So it's the same kind of process. And I think we're open to, wherever the research is being done, or, is fine. And sometimes sometimes it's also those ingredients I was talking about earlier. Maybe there's a university lab team, and then there's also, a for-profit company that's doing another thing. And so that kind of, those elements would complement one another.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Danny, and thank you for answering. So I want to shift gears a little bit and ask a juicy question that there's two, and people are asking how much are correspondents usually involved in the coverage. So Dr. LePuc was really engaged in this coronavirus piece. He was right there when we had all those discussions, and other correspondents like this, is Allison Cooper like this? And the second person is asking about the proverbial Allison Cooper, how much they're involved in shaping the story.
Mm-hmm. Well, the great thing about 60 Minutes is that our correspondents are working journalists, so they are super busy, but also view themselves as journalists and reporters and writers. So it depends. I mean, I would say, and maybe John LePuc will, he might disagree, but we definitely do the heavy lifting early on in a project, and a lot of the legwork and the phone interviews and the logistics and all sorts of things. And then once you get into the production, of course, it's super important that the correspondent has read everything that we've given him or her, and that they come to play in the interviews, because so much of 60 Minutes is an interview program. So we want those Q&A, those moments of, clarity or emotion. So all of our correspondents are super engaged. And then once you get to the editing and the kind of the post-production, sometimes that depends on how much time they have, and also how well aligned your visions are. Sometimes you, as a producer, you'll do the rough draft, the rough cut of the story, and the correspondent, you've talked a lot, you've been aligned. And so you're pretty much on the same page, and you can keep moving forward and there aren't tons of changes. Other times, you know, you'll give that rough cut to a correspondent and they've been envisioning something totally different. So it really depends, but there's heavy engagement always from our correspondents.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, just to echo what Denise was saying, just, you know, traditionally, though this one was a little different because Dr. Lepuc is a doctor, so he comes in with a lot more knowledge on some certain stories than we do. But traditionally, Denise and I are kind of doing all the background heavy lifting of figuring out, you know, what the story is, you know, doing all the reporting, figuring out what our elements are, and really where the correspondents come into play traditionally at 60 Minutes is they're through the process of sort of a gut check of, I don't find that interesting, I don't like that element, no, let's do this. But they serve as, again, another fresh set of eyes where they're really mostly involved in the editing process of the writing, and also just, again, because Denise and I typically come with so much more information because we're the ones doing all these calls and doing all the research, and they come and are able to kind of edit it down in a way that's, you know, digestible for an average American.
So another gut check.
Yes. Yeah. We kind of did it opposite with Dr. Lepuc because of his because he's the chief medical correspondent, but traditionally, you know, 60 Minutes correspondents are doing many stories at the same time. And so they kind of, they're not on all the research calls and stuff with us. So they kind of come in the end as an editing, as a main editor.
And I think Arvind has a question too. Arvind, do you have one?
Yeah, no, I think you covered it. I did have one other one. You know, we talk a lot about your audience that you're thinking about. Do you have a person or somebody in mind when you say, who am I talking to? Who is this, you know, a 45-year-old living in somewhere in the middle of Wyoming? Or are you talking about the viewer in New York?
That's a good question. I don't think I ever think about it that way. I think probably more inclusive than that, thinking about, you know, would a 22-year-old in California think this is interesting? Would a lawmaker in Washington, D.C. think it's interesting? Certainly some stories are probably more policy focused. And so you might be thinking more about, you know, people in power who might see the program. But still, that's not really, I'd say it's what motivates me more is finding that best storytelling, you know, because if you could tell a good story, then people actually hang in there and watch it and maybe come away with something. So I'd say that doesn't motivate me personally as much.
Yeah, I agree. We have like no sort of, you know, it's not like we have our managers saying, you know, do stories that would target this kind of person or audience or whatever. I mean, we have nothing like that. It really is just the only really directive we have is obviously do stories that are relevant or interesting or just, yeah, I mean, as our manager likes to tell us a lot, 60 Minutes only does, I think it's like 100 and what is it, Denise, 120 stories a year?
I think 100, about 100.
So does this is the story you're interested in sort of meet that bar of, you know, the 100 kind of most important or just most interesting stories of the year. Nothing really about, you know, who the audience is, I would say. And yeah.
And before closing out, I just wanted to ask kind of a rapid fire question for both of you. What was, if you have one, is there a favorite story of yours that you did for 60 Minutes, scientific or otherwise? And I know that it's a difficult one.
That's impossible. Katie?
I can start because I have less stories under my belt, so it's an easier question for me. I would say I think my favorite is the story we did called Killing Cancer, and it was really one of the first stories I did at 60 Minutes, but we followed this clinical trial out of Duke for years. We're still kind of following it, but it was using polio virus to treat recurrent glioblastoma patients. And just the access that Duke gave us to both, like, the real-time learning that they were learning through this trial, the science they were learning about, and how they were kind of tweaking their trial as they were learning, coupled with like the incredible patient stories and how the families really opened up their homes to us to tell a story about like one of the most horrific diseases ever, was just really a powerful experience to have as a reporter. And Denise and I did very rare, like, I don't even know if this has ever been done at 60 Minutes, but we did it. We did stories 2 years in a row, and they were both two-parters, right, Denise?
Mm-hmm.
But we just felt like we had such great, it was just such incredible content that we had that it needed to be 2 parts out of the 3 segments that 60 Minutes it is every week. And we did it 2 years in a row. So we were very passionate about that project.
Denise, I'm not going to keep you on the spot. If you don't want to answer, that's okay.
I would say one of my favorite science stories was a series of stories I did over 7 years about brain-computer interface, and actually worked with one of your scientists there in Pittsburgh, Andy Schwartz. And that was just amazing, because some of the best science stories specifically are the ones where the science is happening as you're doing the reporting. You're not reporting on something that's already been published. You're actually working alongside the researchers. And so that was incredible. And then I would say non-science, one of my favorite stories, heart-wrenching, but was on the legacy of lynching in the United States. And I was a history major, so I really like historical stories as well. So some of those stick out in my mind as being the most rewarding.
Yeah, I would definitely, we'll have to find the links to those and send those to attendees so that everyone can watch. So I will turn it over to Arvind, who will just close it out with a couple of notes. And yeah, Arvind, take it away.
Yeah, first off, I think just like we would, last call for questions. I don't see anything, but last call for questions. If not, I'd say thank you, Denise and Katie, so much for giving us this insight behind the scenes look at producing one of the most amazing shows on television that I've seen, and I'm sure many others would agree. And thank you, Anna, for being an amazing moderator. I want to thank also Allison, Ken, Aaron, who are other founding members of AppSciComm, who've really put in the work to make sure that we keep this series going and get people engaged and really keep our members engaged. I do see one question. What's on the docket for 2021? I know that's a long list. I don't know if that's something that you want to answer.
Well, Denise and I that's a good question, because we're asking ourselves the same question.
Yeah.
If you have ideas, we are, as I was telling Anna before, our season winds down at the end of this month. And so during the summer, traditionally we look for kind of stories that we could shoot during the summer that could kind of hold till the fall and could still be relevant. So Denise and I are trying to look and see what we want to do for the summer that would air in the fall. And then we're also just trying to we've been having phone calls to kind of figure out what stories we could cover with the pandemic that also would be relevant to the fall, which is obviously a harder question because it changes daily. But
So a lot
Yeah.
of looking into a crystal ball.
Yeah, but a lot of just reading and taking phone calls and pitches right now. So we're in the market for those.
I saw
That's
that
good to
question.
know.
I couldn't hold myself. I definitely wanted to ask. One thing I want to know is, since everybody's here, how would they reach you if they have ideas, stories? I know a lot of us have signed up to our mailing list, so if we can share your contacts, that'd be okay.
I'm fine with that.
Yep, sure.
Okay, cool. I think that's pretty much it. Unless you have anything more for us, I want to thank everyone for joining us. This has been an amazing Q&A session, very helpful. And you can find us on our website at appscicom.org, and you can sign up to our email list, and we'll keep you posted on latest events and also share the recording of this event when it's ready. And you can email us at appscicom@gmail.com if you have any questions or want to help us with doing more such amazing events. Thank you so much. Again, Katie and Denise, and thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah, this is fun.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Take care. Bye.
Bye.